Tonight, Donald Trump is going to go before the nation and talk about the crisis at the border. The problem with that is there's not a crisis at the border. There are a few crises at the border, but they're actually of his own making. So when he chooses to tear gas or pepper spray migrants, when he chooses to separate families or cage children, when they treat migrants so callously that multiple children die in Border Patrol custody, I would call those crises. I would call those humanitarian issues. That's not what he's talking about, though. He is going to make the case that things are so bad at the border, the immigration situation is so dire that he needs to have his massive wall, whether it's the concrete wall that he was promising for years or the steel wall that he's talking about now. God only knows, maybe it's plastic, I don't know. But that's what he's going to be pushing for. And the issue with that is that the facts just aren't there. And so we're gonna break down the actual situation at the border, the actual situation having to do with immigration into this country, especially undocumented immigration. Is there any case to be made that we face a national emergency? Because there's a very real chance that Donald Trump will declare one a little bit later on today. So I'm gonna attempt to be as fair as possible to him. So let's talk about a couple of different ways that there could be a national emergency at the border. So if lots and lots of people, historic levels of people, were coming across the border, then maybe you could make the case that that's a national emergency. Certainly that would be big. I would be surprised because the headlines haven't been there about it, but maybe the media is dropping the ball and lots of people are coming across the border in ways that they didn't used to. Turns out though that that's not actually the case. So if we bring up this chart, you're gonna see data from 2006 up to 2016 showing net illegal immigration from Mexico and Central America. Exactly the sort of undocumented immigration that Donald Trump loves to talk about. And you see there that for going back about a decade now, there was either negative net illegal immigration or there was equal. And so some people are coming across the border into America, some people are going back from America across the border. That's the sort of process, though, although we don't talk about it this way, is happening at many border crossings literally every day. There are tons of people who go across for the day, then go back. Sometimes it takes a few weeks, sometimes a few months. That sort of thing certainly happens. But we're not facing any sort of massive historic level of people just walking across the border. That is simply not the case. And actually, that chart makes it look more arguable than it is, because if you went to data before that, the levels of people coming across were many times higher than even in those early years, the 2006, 2007 levels. So in terms of sheer quantity of human bodies crossing the border, there is no case to be made that we face any sort of crises. Overall, the number of undocumented workers in the US has been declining steadily for a decade. You don't hear that talked about, but that is simply the case. And then a quick aside, even if there was a huge quantity of people coming across the border, that does not by itself constitute a crisis, especially considering, as we've talked about many times on this show, we've done myth busting before, our Myths of American Politics segments, undocumented immigrants commit crimes at lower levels than native-born American citizens. That's both property crimes and violent crimes. So to that extent, they're actually helping to lower the average level of crime on any individual here inside of the US. But anyway, that first potential case for a crisis, sheer quantity of people, simply not the case. Don't expect to hear those numbers tonight though. So what if we're not worried about how many people are coming across the border? What if we're just worried about high risk individuals? So terrorists coming across the border. That has been the case that's been made recently. So Sarah Huckabee Sanders was talking on Fox News with, I think it might have been Wallace that was talking with her. But in any event, she was saying that they had stopped something like 4,000 people that were terrorists or potential terrorists at the border. Now, even in real time on Fox News, that was shot down as a complete misstatement of numbers that are, even in their broadest definition, only true about worldwide numbers for people being stopped, not at the border. And not terrorists, by the way. It's untrue in a lot of different ways. The vast majority of all of those people worldwide are attempting to enter the US through ships or mostly through planes, not walking across the southern border. So let's talk about the actual numbers of what she was trying to make you think the situation was, what's really going on. Well, there were 41 people on the terrorist screening database encountered at the southern border from October 1st, 2017 to March 31st, 2018. So you have there a little bit like around half a year basically. So that's 41 people. 35 of them were US citizens or legal permanent residents, leaving only 6 non-US persons. And that does not mean 6 terrorists. That's people who have been flagged for one reason or another on this screening database. Now, there are people on that list that are terrorists or likely to be terrorists. That's certainly the case. But it is also possible to be on that list simply because you come from a country that has a lot of terrorists in it. So if you come from Syria during a particular year period, you will be put on that database regardless of whatever actions you have taken or not taken throughout your life. If you have traveled in a manner that is considered suspicious, so if you have flown through certain countries, you can be put on that list. Again, it does not mean that you are a terrorist. It just means they have some reason to be suspicious. But even with all of that said, during that period, there were 6 people. So now I know Fox News will say, well, one's enough. I mean, if you got one, you need a wall. If you've got one person, you need thousands of miles of steel or concrete at the border. But here's the thing, if this was actually a justification for the wall, then maybe it is, but not a justification for the wall between the US and Mexico, because it turns out during that same period on the northern border, Customs and Border Protection stopped 91 people on the database, including 41 who were not American citizens or residents. So man, if 6 people justifies a wall between us and Mexico, 41 has got to justify multiple walls. Good luck getting into Vancouver in the near future. Look, the truth of the matter is, regardless of whatever vague statistics, and I'm trying to be as fair as possible, but even there, this is vague information. The real situation, according to the AP, citing a Cato Institute study, the only known terrorists crossing the Mexico border from 1984 all the way to 2017 were 3 ethnic Albanians from Macedonia who came as children back in 1984 and were arrested in the foiled plot to attack the army base at Fort Dix in 2007. So even if I am being way more fair than anyone should be, and I assume that those ethnic Albanians came in as terrorist kids to later do this plot decades later, then there are 3. They're not from Syria, okay, but they did cross the border. So that is true, we do have 3 over that time period. Now maybe that justifies a wall. To me, personally, it does not. So those are 2 cases, sheer number of people, high risk targeted individuals. Neither of those actually justify a wall. But what about the third argument? There's also drugs. They talk about the drug trade all the time. But unfortunately, the DEA has talked about how drugs come into the country, not just the sheer quantity, but how they come in the first place. So does the DEA think that a wall would actually help? Well, it turns out that only a small percentage of all the heroin seized by CBP along the land border was between ports of entry. So that's being illegally brought in over the border, not through a port of entry. The majority of the inflow entering the US was at legal ports of entry, followed by tractor trailers where the heroin is commingled with legal goods. So yeah, illegal drugs do come into the US. They're not just carted across the border by individuals in backpacks though. They're driven across in cars, in tractor trailers, all through ports of entry, which would still remain in their current status even if we had a wall. So if you had a wall, you would stop at best a very small fraction of the overall heroin trade coming into the US. And there are probably much better ways to do that. So if there's no need for a wall because of sheer quantity of people, if there's no need for a wall because of high risk individuals, if the drug trade would not be impacted by a wall, why shut down the government for it? Why declare a national emergency? Why do a national primetime address? Well, we know why, because his base wants a wall. Not that they need a wall. Many of them don't live anywhere near the border. They don't know the situation of the border better than anyone else across the country. But they feel like they need it because they are scared as hell of the sorts of people they see in Fox News footage along the border. And so tonight, when he gives his address, don't expect facts about any of these situations. Expect a healthy helping of fear-mongering, disinformation, talking points from Stephen Miller, and little else. But hey, maybe I'll be surprised, and maybe the media will do a great job of fact checking him. Thank you very much for watching this clip from the Damage Report. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and ring the bell on YouTube to get notifications of our new videos. And of course, you can catch the full Damage Report live every weekday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific on TYT Network on YouTube TV.